everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Men Have Feelings 2, Season 1, Let's Talk Vulnerability. On today's episode, we are joined by Dr. Chuks, and he's going to be talking to us about vulnerability and the insecurities of human beings as a whole, but also insecurities that men sometimes have in their relationships with female partners. I hope that these episodes bless you, and I hope that they minister healing, and I hope that you find that these episodes are balanced and draw from the book that we all call our reference point, which is the Bible. Welcome, Dr. Chuks.
Hey, Dami, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a lot about yourself.
So, my name's Emeka. People call me Dr. Chuks. That's kind of started as a nickname, but I just kind of roll with it. I work as a doctor in London, in psychiatry, and a third-year doctor. So I've had my foundation year, first year. I've had my foundation year 2, and now I'm on my third year working in psychiatry now. I absolutely love it. I'm working with actually eating disorder patients. So that in itself is just, there's so much that I come across in my day-to-day, the kind of patients I come across that outside of the world of medicine I wouldn't normally come across. But yeah, that's my career currently that I'm doing now. I went to university in Manchester, at Manchester University. I grew up in London. I've just become an uncle today. My sister,
that's great! Congratulations! Oh, that's awesome.
My older sister had it. So I'm one of 4. Come from a Nigerian household. One of 4. Born and brought up in Southeast London. Went to University of Manchester. Stayed for my F1, my foundation year 1 and foundation year 2 as a medic. I did that in the Midlands. So did that initially in Wolverhampton, and then I did that in Stoke. So I've been around, but it's nice to come back and near a family. My wife and I, we actually married about a month before we started as doctors.
Okay.
So this is 2007. So we've married for nearly 3 years.
Wow.
So she's a doctor as well. So yeah, life is it's good at the moment. Very weird time to be alive, obviously, given the whole pandemic and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's basically me.
Yeah, it is definitely really interesting times. And obviously all of this came about because, with the pandemic, I started then offering this virtual dating service to Christian single millennials. And then obviously the questions then started coming in about relationships, and, people would send you messages because you're offering this platform about, oh, he did this and he did this, or she said this and she said that. And I'm like, I love relationships, but I'm not an expert on men. So why don't we ask the men what they think about these issues, and give them an opportunity to answer in a safe space where we want to listen, as opposed to telling them what to do and what not to do. And I think that then helps us to understand each other and bridge that gap, because we're not supposed to be enemies. We're supposed to love each other with a lot of understanding.
Absolutely.
So what does vulnerability mean to you, and how does that intersect with insecurities in men?
That's a really good question. I think, to me, vulnerability is probably the hardest thing for anyone, man or female, to be. That's my opinion, and I think why is that? I think it's because there's lots of pride, I think, that comes with being humans. There's lots of things lots of information that we've amassed over the years, lots of things that make us us. And if someone challenges that, or if we're facing a situation where actually we need to show ourselves for who we really are, it can be really difficult. Lots of people in the past have been vulnerable and been let down because they've left themselves exposed. Some people have been vulnerable and it's felt like they've had something taken away from them, or the persona which they've given off has kind of been undermined, and all of a sudden, oh, I thought this person was meant to be, tough and hard. Why is he, why is he acting like that? I think being vulnerable is one of the hardest things a human being can be. I think men from a Christian male's point of view. I feel like we're not, from my point of view, or we haven't been encouraged to fully engage in those levels of vulnerability that men should. I think from being a male Christian Nigerian, I think that makes it even harder. I think there are certain standards which are actually really good, and there are certain things that actually kind of eat away at the vulnerability which we should be sharing. Some cultural things just make it almost impossible to be really vulnerable. There's a million and one things I could say, and then obviously that when you're vulnerable and you don't get the return on your investment, you've invested your vulnerability and then you get shut down or people look at you funny, then it makes you insecure, and then you're less likely to be more vulnerable. I think definitely something we need to work on. It also, Jesus was super vulnerable. I just don't. Coming from a Christian perspective, and we talk about this a lot, my friends and I, we still don't quite understand where this kind of lack of vulnerability came in, at what point it came in. But yeah, it's different people have their different theories on that. But Jesus was the ultimate example of vulnerability. His emotions, he was in tune with his emotions, and many of us guys just aren't.
Yeah, definitely. And I really love, two things that you said. You said that it's an investment, and so when you don't get a return on your investment, so you open up that door for vulnerability. You tell your partner how you're feeling, or your friend, or explaining to them why you're acting the way you do based on something that's happened in the past, or an experience that has happened in the past that has brought you to that point. And then they either shut the door on that vulnerability, or they don't respond in a way that shows that they understand, or maybe they don't understand, but they accept where you're at and they're willing to work with you going forward. That can obviously then cause us to build up more walls that then become a further barrier to being vulnerable with that same person or with a future partner as well.
Absolutely.
And then you said something as well about Jesus, which I absolutely love. I wrote an article a few years ago titled "Men Don't Cry, but Jesus Wept," and
I love that. I love that title.
And it is, and it's so true in terms of Jesus Christ wept, and he showed his emotions. And David as well, the poet, he was so emotional in terms of his relationship with God and his relationships with other people. He wrote, "All night I'm crying, and I make my pillows swim in my tears."
Wow.
And he was called a friend of God. And so we then have this thing where the people that we look up to in scripture were so in tune with their emotions and had an ability to articulate it, to express it, for us to know exactly where they were. But our culture, in Christian culture and in African culture, we have this thing of the man is strong, the man is a rock, men don't cry. How would you suggest we then start to return to the way, the way scripture encourages us to be?
So I think firstly I want to distinguish between being emotional and being vulnerable, because I think you can be emotional and not vulnerable. Likewise, you can be vulnerable and not emotional.
Yes.
I think there are cultural expectations. In answer to your question, there are cultural expectations which are fine. I think some of the stereotypical expectations of men in let's say a Nigerian culture, I think they're wonderful and fine. I just think within that, it doesn't necessarily need to be separate from. Within that, there's still a place for being vulnerable. I guess so. This let me take it from three different perspectives. So from a Christian perspective, I think if we kind of cut back, because it's very difficult, because in the church you get different ways of doing church, and it's very hard to do church without culture coming into it. So if there was any way of stripping back all of that and just saying, as a Christian, let's look at what Jesus was like, because he's the ultimate example, right? He was a man's man. Like, he was a carpenter. Like, this guy hang around with his lads. You know, this is a guy who, in so many different ways, was the ultimate male. But yet he was able, in different circumstances, to be vulnerable. Now, I think if we use probably from a Christian perspective, I think that's something we can definitely do. Try to cut back at all the different cultural things that are kind of being layered on top of what being a Christian means. Cut that back and let's just focus on what the Bible says and what Jesus is like. So I think that's something we can definitely do more of. Because, for example, I've been in forums where you ask a question and then you can clearly see the person who's given me a response has given it as they just what their culture says, or they've given it because that's what they think is a good idea. They haven't actually looked at the scripture, looked at Jesus. What would Jesus do? So I think that's something we can definitely do. From a Nigerian perspective, I think that it's difficult. Someone like me who's born in the UK, brought up here, my parents have a different perspective to me. Not necessarily, bad or good, but they just have a very different view of the world. And we're in this really awkward position right now you know it, I know it, in the social media, just the world now, people find it very difficult to listen to other people's opinions. And people that know me, including my wife, like, they know that I awkwardly like to sit on the fence, not because I actually don't have an opinion, but when I'm talking to someone, I like them to be clear that what my opinion is, but I don't like to dismiss their opinion. And I think a lot of that happens in a Nigerian culture, and not just Nigerian culture, just in general. Like we said, like social media now, like the political left can't even listen to the political right. The political right aren't having it from the political left, and there's just kind of, people are more angry and less willing to listen than ever before. So I think from a cultural perspective, from a Nigerian point of view, I think we need to listen more. And as difficult as that is, it's very difficult to do on a practical, but it's easy to say, isn't it? But especially when it's your loved one and you think that this should be a certain way, and why is this person doing this, and if we listen more and create a space where actually you can be vulnerable, that would help. And then from a male point of view, these are the three angles I'll take it from. I'll just take it from being a Christian, being Nigerian, and then being male. I think what can we do? I actually think men don't mind being vulnerable amongst men. I actually don't think men mind that much, but I think it's always, in my experience, I've noticed that it's always one person needs to be vulnerable first. And then it opens up this can of worms, and all of a sudden everyone is really open. I remember watching this TD Jakes YouTube video. He's at a men's conference and he's just challenging them about sexual sin. And till today, I cannot believe the amount of men that came forward. And it was something that was really, really, like, something you wouldn't believe. He was challenging people. If you're like this, raise your hand and come to the front. No one came to the front. Then one person came. Then all of a sudden, loads of people came. So I think from a male perspective, we need to appreciate that actually we're not the only ones that are going through certain things, or we're not the only ones who want to show emotions, but I feel like we can't. So if I'm vulnerable, it'll make the other person more vulnerable, which helps me in turn. And so we can work with each other. And when it comes to men and female spaces, like male being vulnerable in front of other women, he's not he doesn't know. That's a lot harder. That is a lot harder, and I'm sure people have million and one different strategies they could use for that, but it's very difficult because I'm someone who's actually struggled with vulnerability, and when we first got married, that was probably the biggest thing. Being vulnerable was one of the most difficult things for me. So I wouldn't encourage people to be open themselves up too readily for everybody, but I do think you have to pick the right person or the right people. Yeah.
That's amazing, and I love how you broke it down. And just taking it back into sort of the upbringing side of things, which often happens in the home and sort of in the African setting. How would we then encourage perhaps the next generation who are now raising children to encourage vulnerability in both, in both the sexes, and also perhaps in terms of the children seeing their parents in a vulnerable state, so that they know that it is okay to open myself up in safe spaces?
Yeah. Well, I'm currently reading a book at the moment called Why Love Matters. It's basically a book by she's a psychotherapist. She basically talks about the importance of a safe space for a child to grow. This is not just after they've been born, but before they've been born. There needs to be the right environment, the right ingredients in order for the child to grow and grow healthily and to be emotionally sound, and emotionally put together. Because the kind of patients I work with, they have very disjointed, a lot of them, not all of them, they have very disjointed thought processes, and their emotions aren't really, their emotional responses to things aren't the way they should be, based on previous traumas or previous experiences. And they haven't had spaces where they've been able to show an emotion and get the appropriate response. I think for future generations, so for example, for my kids, I don't have any kids yet. And I honestly, massive respect to all parents out there, because raising kids, I can only imagine, is like the most difficult. And you can always have the right, you see it, you can have all the right ideas, but when it comes to it, it's a completely different ballgame. So I can only talk from what I think would be the best solution. And I think for the next generation, I think, let's just take my family house, for example. My wife and I kind of see eye to eye with things like this. We would like to create a platform whereby males, let's just take the male, because women, I always say this, and I think everyone needs to listen to, women are given more room to express the full array of their emotions. This being, whereas men are limited. For example, if a guy was to just cry over anything, his woman would stereotypically be like, why are you crying? Why are you crying? Put yourself together. You can't keep crying. Whereas it would be a lot more acceptable if it was the female part. And I'm just talking stereotypically. It's not always the case. And I know in particular in a workplace, women can often, when they get angry, then they get labeled as, oh, she's aggressive, she's this and that. Whereas male can more comfortably in the workplace show his anger. Or likewise with emotions, or if the woman cries or is really emotional, she's just hormonal, whereas if a guy is more emotional, then they'll be like, oh wow, he's really thought, he's in deep in thought. So I appreciate there are exceptions, but I mean, as a general and on a relationship level, I feel like men do not express the full breadth of their emotions. So I definitely think for future generations, we can enable that to happen. We need to enable that to happen. It's so important within the confines of the culture of the house. If it's a Nigerian, you're not less of a man because you said, Mum, I felt really upset from what I saw today, and you're crying, or you're not there's through that emotion, there's so much education that can happen, And I feel like we're missing out on educating the young people because we're kind of shutting off doors to learning. You know, if someone goes through an emotional process or something happens to someone and they go through an emotional journey, that can be very empowering, and people can learn a lot through having a problem, showing their emotion, being vulnerable to their parents, and their parents meeting them right at their where their emotion is,
Yeah.
and delivering, you know, words of wisdom, or delivering them, you know, an emotional response, like, you know, hugging them or patting them on the back, or, you know, or telling them off if they're, you know, off if they've done something that is, you know, is incorrect. Like, there are loads of different. Being vulnerable doesn't necessarily mean your response is going to be good or positive, but it just, we need to just make sure we don't shut off that process of being vulnerable, if you see what I mean. So I think that's definitely something we can do in the future generations. And if enough people do that, I honestly think these things, because parents talk, you know, parents talk, kids talk. If a kid at school is acting a certain way, it can influence other kids.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be a very, very slow process, because you have to unpick generations and centuries of things being done a certain way. But so I'm in mental health, and we know the consequences of people not being able to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And they can be really, really severe. So, but likewise, people are talking about it more, which is really good. Not just in secular spaces, even in Christian spaces, people are talking about the future generation and being vulnerable more, which is great news.
Yeah, yeah, that is awesome. And I'm just gonna jump into our questions now.
Yeah.
So let's just have a quick look. Your video move? It looks like your video is shuffling a little bit. Is it on?
No. Is it not clear?
No, it's clear, but sometimes it looks as though it's moving. Is it on a?
Oh,
No.
sorry. It's on a steady surface now. I just moved
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. So we'll just jump into it. So, okay, so the first question was, why do we shame men for crying and showing emotions in public? And I think we've already talked a bit about that in terms of culture and things. So now one of the questions is about intimidation by a partner being successful. And it goes as, why are men intimidated by successful women, and why does this affect their emotions?
Mm, mm. Yeah, this is a question which is probably easier to give a response to than in real life.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, you know, there's giving this response that should be the case, and then there's the actual reality.
Yeah.
Like, it's easier for me to give a response because I'm in a situation whereby I can hold things down, as if it by myself, or but I also my wife can. But if I was in a situation where I wasn't able to do that and my wife was just a breadwinner, I I, I would feel some kind of way. Now, whether that's because of my cultural upbringing, or whether that's because of what I've perceived,
Right.
um, is socially acceptable, I have no idea. So I can only give you really the response that should be like the textbook response, because it's very, very difficult, honestly, very, very difficult. Let's take an example of a male in a relationship with a female. He's bringing in money, she's bringing a little bit of money, but he's holding it down. And then one day he loses his two legs in a car accident and he can't work anymore. And then it's just her. Like that. And so she's like having to, like, that isn't exactly the scenario that you presented me with, but it's a situation where the woman is now the breadwinner. It's very, very difficult as a male. I think it is the way it is, as in I think a male would react badly to that. Well, as I'm sure anyone would if they, had that kind of accident. But what I mean is, a reason why male act in a certain way, um, if often, not always, if their partners earn more than them, or if they, are in a place where financially they're inferior, is it's probably because there are certain some people would again take it from this is why I wanted to split it between some people from a Christian perspective would say that a male has certain responsibilities to be the provider.
Yeah.
And if they're not fulfilling that, then they've fallen short of what it means to be male. And that's a big thing for a lot of people. Um, from a cultural level, from a cultural perspective, there are certain things a man does. Women stay in certain areas of the kitchen, or this is just traditionally how some people across the world, this is how it is. Women don't do their housewives stereotypically, and then the man is the one going out there and bringing home the bacon. And in the Western world, that or in, let me say, countries like the UK, that's even though people have come to the UK with those cultures, that's less the case now. But I think definitely from a cultural level, that is something to think about, and that is why men respond the way they do to that. I remember talking to one of my really good friends. Her partner is like a hotshot in London, earns loads and loads and loads. He was talking with his colleagues. They're not Christian, but he was talking to. This is where the third angle of this, which is being a man. He was talking with his colleagues at work about when they have a kid, and he was talking about having paternity leave and stuff. And they were like, "Oh, mate, no way! There's no what paternity leave. What's that about? What's that about? Um, what's your partner doing? What's your partner going to be doing? What's your?" And that kind of laddish culture that men met the men, when they're in the changing room, that locker room talk, that kind of thing. That's again influences men and why they feel a certain way if they're not able to live out the expectations that other males or other women have of them. It's very difficult, really, because what makes this worse is the female's perspective.
Okay.
Women often have that perspective, have that expectation of the men.
Okay.
So I've talked to so many. I'll never forget. One of my friends from university said her engagement ring has to be 3 months' salary.
Yeah, I don't know where that trend came from, but it's pervasive for so long.
It's 3 months' salary, and then she said, yeah, she wants it to be 14K. And I was like, hold on a sec, 3 months' salary, 14K. Who do the math? Who are you going to be marrying? Like some million? Like you need to like. This is one of many different examples of which I've seen. It's not just the men who the men feel the way they feel and feel inadequate or feel inferior because they're financially let down, not just because they have their own expectations culturally or in terms of their Christianity or being a man, but also from the other side, the actual woman has an expectation of them. So they end up, so it almost adds another dimension. So you have all these things playing intertwining, or you see like social media, or you see like film and TV, and it's often the situation is where the man is the one who is financially empowered or superior, and and no wonder you then have a situation where a man is in his eyes falls short, and then he falls to bits, because that's just a although to be fair, I've seen a couple of unbelievable examples of men being house husbands and women doing all the. Now, I didn't grow up in a house like that, so I can't really imagine what it's like in the house, and I just think, wow, they're very refreshing to see those. But honestly, some Christians would look at that and be like, that's wrong. If a man's capable and able, he hasn't had his 2 legs amputated in a car accident. Why is he not going out there and bringing home some bacon. Some Christians would have that point. This is the thing. It's very difficult.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose it goes back to sort of our perceptions of gender roles in the home, and defining who does what by gender as opposed to who does what based on who is capable. And do you think that that is then quite a significant factor when considering merging two individuals together to then create a new family? Do you think that those gender roles and our perceptions of gender roles are quite important before then, saying, yes, we're going to take it to the altar?
I think people need to definitely see eye to eye before they come together. That is like, there's no point asking. People ask, they're dating and they're asking each other, what's your favorite color? That is not, these are not the questions. These are not the questions that are going to carry you as forward as a relationship. You need to ask proper questions. I remember there was this one situation where, my grandparents were in the house, and my dad and my mum, they were doing stuff which was a bit more modern. Let's put it that way. And my grandparents didn't like it, so they spoke at it. And I remember my dad getting quite angry and retaliating and be like, no, this is how we do it in our house. Your cultural whatever, like, I'm as Nigerian as you are, but this is the way we do it in our house. And every relationship is very different. I think gender roles is, well, again, like, it's massive. This is probably going to be one of the hardest things for us as kids, as raising our kids. All sorts of situations and discussions when we talk about gender and identity, and this is very, very topical now. But we can simplify it. As Christians, we can simplify it. We can just make sure we're on the same page when it comes to, for example, my wife and I, we we work really well in terms of, I cook, she cooks. It's actually a privilege to cook for the other person, to be honest. So we both love to do it. I take out the bins, she doesn't. She's really, really clean and likes to get all the surfaces super tidy. I tend to just have things in the right place and everything neat, but she's super conscious about the dirt and cleanliness. It's just kind of like a partnership. And I think predefined gender roles can be very dangerous, because if there are actually there's some situations where the guy knows he's the better cook, but he won't, because he feels like he's so consumed by what should be the case, that he doesn't cook. It's like, why not? Your situation is completely different to your parents or your friends. I don't think we should, as Christians, if a man is loving on his wife and if a woman is submitting to the man, these are just stereotypical, and I don't say submitting to being lesser than. If they're both loving, that verse about submit, love, in my eyes, the man has to do even more. The man has to do what Christ did and die. So the woman's submitting, but the guy is dying. That you have to look out for. There have been some times my mum came from work and was so tired, so fatigued. My dad stepped in and said, "What do you want me to do?" He's going out doing the shopping. He's cleaning up. Like, all these things are, you think my dad's dad cleaned and did the shopping? Of course he didn't. Do you see what I mean? My dad, no one had to tell him twice. It's not about what your parents did. It's about how, in your situation, it's different. And I guess, God's gonna give us all wisdom and guide us because there's so many different opinions left, right, and center, and ultimately it's just you, your partner, your spouse, and God. That's it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the next question following on off that is in courtship as well.
Mm.
So a woman who is in a financially superior position to the male partner,
Yeah.
and that then being an issue in dating.
Mm.
A lot of women have said that sometimes, they feel as though they need to dumb down on how much they spend, how they dress, what kind of cars they drive. Culturally, a single Nigerian woman, oh no, you don't drive a Mercedes, don't drive a Jeep, don't drive a BMW, even if you can afford it. It's going to scare men away. And that is what has been told to quite a lot of young millennial women. And they find as well that perhaps in the dating scenes as well, the men that they're meeting also fall in line with that rhetoric that has been passed down from their parents, especially their moms. Their moms and their aunties are normally the ones that would say these kind of things to them. So what advice would you suggest to those kind of ladies?
You need to give room. Give room for the man to love on you. Love languages, as I'm sure you know, Gary Chapman, it's epic. If someone likes to give you gifts, give them space. Give them space to give you a gift. I honestly, I completely disagree with the fact that you can't drive a car if you can afford it. Or I think women should just be. They shouldn't dumb down anything. They should just live how they. Because if a guy is too insecure in himself to see a woman who's doing well and wants the woman to wear rags and be driving a car that she needs to pray to make sure that it gets to its destination, one of those cars that you can no honestly this is really important. I honestly think it's so dangerous when we're saying that you should dumb down yourself or be financially less or don't reveal how much, but you have to, if though you can, you have to give him space to show that he cares about you. One of the things I got told by my dad is in courtship, every time you meet her, because we were obviously we didn't live together obviously until we got married. So at one point, like I spoke to you earlier, she went to University of Birmingham, I went to University of Manchester. So there was a little bit of a long distance. Well, Birmingham to Manchester, some people wouldn't call that long distance, but still, it's 2 hours. Yeah, 2 hour drive. So, I made sure whenever I saw her, I had something in my hand. Something. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be expensive. It's like, oh, you just grab a teddy bear or something cute, or oh, I got this chocolate. This is your favorite chocolate, just to show that you're constantly thinking about them. And there's a way in which a lady can be, which shows that actually she cares about these things. Or she, oh no, I have it already, or like, oh no, I'm fine, I'm fine. Oh, I didn't need that. No, thank you. You can still create a space for him to be generous and to love on you, even though you have. But honestly, I think it's quite sad actually, because I think a lot of women are telling other women to dumb down how they are perceived, because they know. So mums and aunties who are telling younger women this, they know how insecure men are. So, and I don't, and God forbid me for for saying this, but they might even know how insecure their husbands or their brothers are. So they know, they're assuming that the next generation will be very similar. So do what I did. Dumb it down a bit. Don't put them off. We need to change this kind of thinking. And I think if men, this goes back to what we were talking about, being vulnerable. If men were okay with being a bit more vulnerable, and there wasn't this ego and this pride that was so front, up and center, then I think they would be able to deal with their women, having a fly car or more than they have in the past. this is what I think. So I think it all kind of stems back to that vulnerability, to be honest. But in summary, in the conclusion to your question, buy the car that you want to buy. Obviously, be financially responsible and save long term and stuff. But just no need to dumb down. Likewise, it's not biblical to be flashy and flamboyant. So you have to do this all with Christian wisdom. But I don't believe in women just kind of wearing rags just to appease the men.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And I really love what you said about receptiveness in terms of receiving gifts and giving a man room to show you that he cares and to show you that love. And I love what your dad said in terms of just making sure that even if it's something very, very little, just making sure that you give her something. That is absolutely amazing. The next question is, what kind of issues can trigger insecurity? And how can we identify these in courtship?
I think you mean identify as in how can the individual identify, or how can the spouse or the spouse to be or the partner identify it?
So I think this has come from a woman. So I think it's how can a woman in a dating relationship identify the insecurities of a man, and so what ways can it manifest? As a sort of red flag to run the other way, perhaps.
I think there is some. Okay, so communication is key. Communication is key, and I think there are some insecurities which I think are like really, really bad. And and if a guy feels insecure in certain things, it might, there are some men that are so insecure on another levels that it gets to the point that they end up being so controlling that the relationship is not viable. It just can't continue. Now, when to know it's time to end is difficult. It's difficult, but this is where being prayerful. This is where asking this. I'm just talking from a woman's perspective. So asking his friends or asking his people that knew him before to try and get some context. What's this guy actually like? His insecurity, or maybe asking your really close friends, like, this guy is acting like this. Is this something? Because remember, there are insecurities that you are called into the situation to kind of work with them and help with. Everybody to some extent has some insecurities, and when they come out, it doesn't mean I'm off. No one is 100% kind of. We're all flawed, and we know we're flawed. The Bible says we're flawed, so that's 100% normal. It's when the insecurities start to get in the way. And there are 1,000,001 different situations that we can think of. But that one of control is very common. Guys, if they're with a very good-looking girl, or that stereotypically, and they act a certain way, in order to, because they're feeling really insecure in themselves, or if we talked about financial insecurity, because and they start to almost when the guy's expressing overly negative emotions towards the woman in certain situations, it's just not. It's, in my opinion, it's big red flags, and some women will put up with it because they're just happy that they can tell their girlfriends they're with someone. Some women would literally put up with all sorts of nonsense just so they can say, oh yeah, they can post an Instagram picture, and say, oh, Bay and I were at dinner. Some people would put up with absolutely anything. But deep down, those things they're putting up with are insecurities in the man. And I think it's just about identifying what insecurities in a man are too severe for you to put up with. And remember, you're not married. Christians should be able to dust themselves. It's very difficult, again, because, as I'm sure you know, you know, Christian men are a lot less than Christian women. This is just on it. This is the unfortunate truth. So a woman finds herself with a guy who's good, really nice to look at, but has so many insecurities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's hard to call an end to that. It's really, really hard because you kind of ask yourself, especially if you're an older girl and you're wondering, oh gosh, is this ever going to happen again?
Mm-hmm.
You know, am I just being really too harsh? Can I not work with it? Honestly, it's really, really difficult, but there are certain times, and I believe this, I think there are certain times when the insecurities are so severe
Yeah.
that you need to call an end to it,
Mm-hmm.
because you're not called to that season in that person's life. That person may need to process all this without you, and then maybe someone else later on in that person's life will meet them there. And the relationship, you might not be called to be in that situation at that time. But yeah, there's so many examples. If I sort of start giving them of, people have different situations they're in. But it's up to that person to be really aware that men do have insecurities, and that's fine, but not if they're so severe.
And the next question is, why are men less likely to be open and vulnerable with women regarding their finances?
Yeah. I men like to be, so from my perspective, like you just want to come across as if you got it all together.
Mm-hmm.
You want to come across as if your finances are like are so good, and don't worry, leave it to me. I'll deal with it. Again, it goes back to like, I want to impress you. No, that's my job. But then when someone challenges that, it becomes a big issue. Um, they're a lot less likely, because it's kind of, because your question was, why are they less likely, isn't it? And it's expectation. It's expectation on themselves. It's perceived biblical expectation. You know, no, that's not your job. Stop asking about the money. Stop. This is why, people do their finances in a different way in relationship. My wife and I, we have separate accounts, and we also have a joint account. All our money goes into the set joint account, and then we siphon some off to each of our individual accounts. For maybe you want to give someone a special present, or special, this, or you want to buy some. You don't necessarily always want to be looking from the but bills and all that come from me. It just depends. People have their different ways of doing finances. But I think, again, because the reason why, because I come from a perspective where this was a really big thing for me. This pride, and the I'm the man, and the vulnerability, and I knew deep down it was primarily, from my perspective, it was primarily a cultural thing. But I also knew that there were biblical scripture that could justify my position, but I was, on reflection, I was using the Bible to try. I was shoehorning the Bible to try and support my decision, rather than me making my decision based on what the Bible says, if you see what I mean. And we do that a lot. It's easy, very easy. Look, the Bible is 66 books long. Of course you can find some biblical text to back up your opinion.
Yes.
Obviously. I just think we should be, I just think, when it comes to, in answer to your question, why, I think we should just be honest with ourselves and say, the reason is because of the expectation we put on ourselves. And I think we can definitely, we should be open to share that and change that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And the next question is, how can we change the stereotype that men who express their emotions, so this goes back to sort of the difference between vulnerability and emotionality, So why do we, how can we change that stereotype that men who express their emotions are weak?
Mm. Well, I've mentioned before, I think we need to look to Jesus.
Hmm.
You have to.
Hmm.
You have to, because if you don't, you will just you just won't accept it. You just will not accept that it's okay for a man to be emotionally open or emotionally vulnerable. You just won't accept it. Or the only other way you would accept it is if everybody else or society accepts it, which they don't stereotypically, not yet anyway. I think we need to change it, because the question was asking why, like, how can we change it? Is that right?
Yes.
How can we change that perception that if men are emotional, that they're weak, that they're actually not weak? How can we change that? I think we can just talk to more men, encourage them to be open. And I think in different spaces, it's very different. It's very different for men telling men to be open. Because honestly, men, if you didn't know this already, you know that I'm telling you, men are very open with other men, very open. Especially if one person is open. I think it has become a lot easier over the years of being married for me to be open with my wife, to the point now where it's like I almost can't recognize myself from before. But it takes time. These things take time. I think different relationships are very different. Different relationships are very different, and I think it's harder to show emotion in certain situations, and I think it's harder to show as in people don't necessarily listen to everyone. So if my friend tells me to be open and vulnerable, or my wife tells me to be open and vulnerable, these are two examples where I'm more likely to. If I someone who I don't, or my pastor may say be open and vulnerable, I don't know. People have different relationships with these different people in their life. Some people might find it harder to be vulnerable with their family or be emotional with their family. So I think, in answer to your question, how can we change that? I think if wherever the person gets most of whoever the person listens to most. Let's say I listen to my friend. If enough people are talking about it, if all the people in my life are talking about being vulnerable, but I only listen to my wife, and my wife says be vulnerable, then I might start to. I think we just need to basically, in summary, we need to just talk about it more. Because the more we talk about it, the more it's likely to happen. If I hear someone on the TV talking about being vulnerable, it's like water off a duck's back. I don't care, but I need to be the right person at the right time to tell me, and I'll most likely be emotional and I'll open up, because then we can change this perception of that, or men's thoughts of that actually I'm weak if I am emotional, which is honestly it's killing. It's killing men. It's killing men, and it starts from a really early age. It starts from a very early age. A kid, boys grows up. He's riding his bike. He's 3, 4, 5. Riding his bike, and he falls over and cries, and he gets told, "What are you crying for? What? Stop crying!" No, but this is how it is. Whereas a woman is encouraged to be really emotional and play with her dolls and build houses, and they're already thinking of relationship. They're already thinking about being expressive and emotions, and then they get to the age of 25, 20, whatever the age they are, and men are expected to just be emotional in a relationship. It's just it's asking the impossible. I've told some of my girlfriends, I don't mean actual girlfriend, I mean friends who are girls. I've asked some of them in the past. I've told them, you have to educate your guy. You need to educate him. He's dumb. Honestly, he's really dumb when it comes to understanding how to express emotions. It doesn't mean he's not emotionally intelligent,
Mm.
but he personally, his emotions, he struggles to vocalize them or to express them. So you need to just be patient. Honestly, be patient. It's okay if your guy isn't opening up yet. He's learning.
Mhm.
You know, I think people are. I've seen a few situations where women are very quick to dump the guy or end the relationship. Actually, he might just be on a journey, and it's okay. The journey isn't necessarily long. You understand? Need to understand his context. Has he come from a? Is he the only child?
Mm.
Has he come from a split family? Has he come from a culture where it's not okay to show emotions? Has he got, like, there's those people that those are things that make someone the way they are. And you need to fully understand someone's context before you just write them off.
Mm.
So I think that's definitely a way in which we can kind of change that narrative about if someone's emotional, that they're weak, because they're not necessarily weak. And guys need to know that, and same with women.
That's awesome. And just as we're rounding up, if you were to give men now advice on things that they should know about emotions and dealing with a woman going into marriage, what would you say to them, Christian men?
Mm. Um, I heard this once. I think it was from one of my old pastors. He used to say, sorry, let me just get the lights in. He used to say, it's important for us to be transparent,
Mm.
not just with life, but with our emotions as well.
Mm.
And he doesn't mean honest, because there's two different things. If you're honest, you're just giving the answer when asked. You're being given the right answer when asked. Transparent means you just volunteer it anyway. So, being in a situation where actually you talk to your spouse, like, this is how I'm feeling. And honestly, like, communication, when they say communication is key, it sounds so cliche. It sounds like one of the most cliche statements that you ever, communication is key, but my goodness, like, if someone, because this is what happened prior to marriage with my wife and I, we found ourselves in situations where actually we thought, oh my goodness, like, we have made a vow to not do X. And we didn't. Thankfully, to God, we didn't. But there were situations that we had found ourselves in where things were so steamy.
Mm.
And when everyone starts to think with their head starts to become scrambled, where actually we had to talk. We literally had to talk. I am feeling like this. We need to go somewhere now. We need to do this. Communication is key. Whatever you're thinking, you have to say it. Because if you don't say it, it's when there's silence. It's when there's silence, and then you lock eyes with each other, and then hands start to, and then there's silence, and you just keep. And it's that silence which causes where things start to spiral out of control. Communication is key. And that's not just pre-marriage, that's also in marriage as well. So I think if there's two things, I would say that firstly, communication is key. In absolutely how remember, you're with this person for life. You are literally with this person for life. It doesn't make any difference if you say it or not. So you might as well just say it. You're annoying me. Say it. Honestly, you have to say it. I really hated that. Don't. There's no point in harboring it up inside. Let your emotions come. Cry. I really hated what you just did. Talk about it. Communication is key. Secondly, be transparent. Be transparent. Don't wait for the person to ask you. Just be transparent. Just volunteer it anyway. And this is with it's similar to what I said. Communication is key. Emotionally reveal it. Don't let someone ask you before you. And it may come across as if, oh my goodness, the whole house is just going to be one big emotional wreck. Everyone just expressing their emotions everywhere. But no, it doesn't work out that way. And actually, it's a very healthy platform. And I think like you asked earlier about raising kids, I think when you have a healthy environment like that, where there is emotions are able to be expressed in a healthy way, I think when kids see that, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
So those are the two things I would say: communication being key, and be transparent, not just honest. Be transparent.
Okay. And the final question is advice to Christian women about their expectations from Christian men in dating.
You're not perfect,
Mm-hmm.
so stop expecting your man to be. You're not perfect. It's kind of don't lower your expectations. This is what people always say: don't lower your standards. But it's very hard. It's very hard. And one of my friends and I, we were discussing, because we used to have a podcast where we used to discuss, and it was, the question was, is it okay to move churches to find someone? If your church is just, you look around you and there's just 50-year-olds everywhere, is it okay to move churches? And I don't know, what did we even come up with what did we come up to the answer to that? But ultimately, we're not. What am I trying to say? I think what I'm trying to say is women need to firstly be comfortable with how they are. Be comfortable in how they are. Secondly, they need to realize that actually they're on a journey as well. They're on a journey as well. Your man is on a journey as well. You're not necessarily ahead of where he is. That might just be how you're perceiving it to be. You need to understand your cultural context. You need to understand, why am I thinking this about this person? You might even have a whole load of baggage from previous relationships. Why I gave you the story of is it okay to move churches? I think people can be so preoccupied with oh my goodness, this church doesn't have any men, I'm moving to the next one. This church doesn't have any men, I'm moving to the next one. Now, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer with moving churches. If your church literally doesn't have any men in it that are your age, then I understand that predicament. But I think having your eyes open, like, it's not necessarily church where you're going to find someone. It's not necessarily church, firstly. I also think you might have found the right guy, but you've either just dismissed him because maybe he has, I don't know, gap in his teeth or something silly, something so minor, or or maybe he has one or two flaws, and you've written him off. This is what I was telling earlier about his insecurities. Sometimes you can call an end to it, but actually maybe that's something you have to work on. It's very difficult because there are million and one different situations whereby Christian women need to make a decision on dating a Christian guy. But I think firstly you need to just be solid in who you are. And then, like I said, you have to know that you're not perfect. You're just not. But have an expectation. No, if the guy is willing to go on a journey, if the guy is willing to learn and accept and everyone's learning, no one's perfect. If he's on a journey, willing to take this Christian journey with you, and that he's solid in his Christian faith, then I think there are more Christian guys than I think Christian women realize. I think so. Also, don't be surprised if the guy isn't ready to commit straight away, because women are, like I said, from the age of 2, they're playing with dolls. A guy isn't. He's typically when a guy proposes, his guy mates will be like, "Oh, well done, mate. Oh, what a brave decision. That's amazing. Oh, wow." And a girl would show her ring, and he'll be like, "Oh my goodness, he posed." Da, da, da. Like there's different reactions.
Mm-hmm.
A guy's level of commitment, I don't think comes as easily as a woman's. I just stereotypically, I just don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I might be completely wrong, but this is what I've perceived. You know, a guy, they shy away because they want to make sure the decision's absolutely right.
Yeah.
So Christian women again shouldn't think that just because he's not diving in, he's not interested.
Mm-hmm.
He's maybe just trying to examine the situation, and he needs to realize that this girl is literally the one
Mm-hmm.
for life.
Yeah.
So imagine if he gets that wrong. So yeah, there are a few things there. So I don't know whether I've made any sense, but
Yeah, no, you have actually, and that has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming on and answering our questions. Where
yeah.
can our listeners and viewers find you online?
Okay, so I have on Instagram, so it's Dr. Chuks, and I'm releasing a daily devotional, super short daily devotional on September 1st. So yeah, so look out for that. Hopefully, it's a blessing to people.
Oh, that is awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Make
Thanks,
sure you
Dami.
guys subscribe. And those of you who still want some dates, make sure you go onto the website and register. And we will see you again soon with the next episode.